Welcome everybody here to the Lakers Lounge. I'm Anthony Irwin. Today joined by a good buddy of mine, former colleague of mine, somebody who covers the Warriors about as good as anybody does. Brady Klopfer of Golden State of Mine is here with me. How you doing, buddy? You doing all
I'm
right?
I'm doing all right. I'm doing better than I would have been doing had the Warriors lost on Wednesday. So
Are
it's
you? Are we actually better off like with them still in our
fair
lives?
question. That's, honestly, even as someone who covers them, even as someone who roots for them, I'm not sure I have an answer to that question.
I was like, one of the things that I legitimately found myself thinking last night when the Lakers it was always like in that 10 to 14 point range, late. And every time they started creeping closer and they got within single digits, I was like, Jordan Poole's going to start thinking about how nice his life will be without Draymond Green in it for a little bit. Like, you know,
Jordan Poole already imagining what the beaches in Bora Bora look like this time of year.
yeah,
Already thinking about what training camp looks like with
yeah.
Draymond Green wearing
You know
purple
who
and
doesn't
gold.
who isn't at risk of punching him at any moment at any time is the bartenders at Bora Bora all inclusive beaches. Like those guys. He's
Fully
not. He's.
risk-free environment for a young millionaire.
I mean, I guess like if he's like terrible to his bartenders, there's some risk there. But which
Drop $100 tip and you're not getting punched, Jordan, the whole trip.
yeah, it was the series has been fascinating. The response to it has been fascinating. It's funny. The people who cover these teams at this point, like if this series took place 5 years ago, right? Um, I think like you and I would be talking very differently because we wouldn't have known each other as well. I think I think like I started this series with Sam and Andy, and I think that conversation probably goes very differently. Like interactions online probably go very differently. As we have seen here with the guys playing in it, right? We've seen a whole bunch of respect at every turn, basically. A couple pot shots here and there. Steve Kerr's flopping comment. LeBron saying that he has never been associated with flopping. I think Jermichael Green today put on Instagram,
Yep.
like photoshopped a cap on LeBron James, which, clearly signifies that he disagrees with LeBron's summary of his career. But like for the most part, there hasn't been like a tug on your cape moment. There hasn't been anybody poking bears. And yeah, it's provided its own kind of weird tension though, right? Like last night, Draymond gets an and one, gets right in Jared Vanderbilt's face, like early on in the game. And Vanderbilt kind of gives him a shove. AD like steps in to give him a shove. Draymond's like talking back and forth at the free throw line and stuff. And I'm like, finally, we're here. We're good. The series has started. But it has still been its own variety of really entertaining. How have you taken it in to this point?
Yeah, I mean, that point I was thinking about that exact same point, because like, I love Draymond Green. Everyone who's listening to this is probably a Lakers fan, so they're gonna hate me for saying that. But I'll just unabashedly admit I love Draymond Green.
How dare you? This is a uniformly beloved NBA podcast.
Yes, and a national unbiased.
Ignore
podcast.
the Lakers stuff. Like that's like right up here.
Changes every day. It'll be the Grizzlies next week and the Magic the week after, I'm sure.
Yeah, yeah.
But
Who put that Hollywood thing right there? Like why?
Yeah, no stay in this. But all I could think about last night, there was that moment where Draymond and Anthony Davis got tangled up and they both hit the ground and AD got called for an offensive foul, I think. And then they both just kind of like sprung up and went about with their days. And then there was, of course, the moment with LeBron and Draymond the game before where, not even remotely a dirty play by any stretch of the imagination, but obviously Draymond hits the ground pretty hard, hits his head off the ground.
Yeah.
And all I could think about was Draymond Green stomping on Domantas Sabonis and then claiming that it wasn't a dirty play. It was just that his foot was stuck, and where else was he supposed to put his foot? And all I'm thinking about, wow, it's wild how often your foot gets accidentally stuck in precarious positions with players you
And I just look for
openly
people to
hate.
stomp on.
Yeah.
Like I just
Just it's wild. What are the odds that you dislike this guy and you accidentally find your foot on him? Whereas you're good friends with Anthony Davis, you're great friends with LeBron James.
yeah.
You have the same agent as the two of them. Magically, your foot isn't ending up on any of them. What are the odds? It's just wild.
Yeah, it turns out the guy who was stuck, that 127 hours guy who like had to cut his hand off, like all that was missing there was somebody's chest to step on. He would have been fine. He'd
Would've
have
been
two
totally
hands right
fine.
now. Like he'd have both of
Imagine
his
what
hands.
could have been.
Yeah, it has though, like it's made for its own comedy though, because there are moments where they catch themselves and you watch them clearly catching themselves. Like
Yes.
normally they would Draymond would kick somebody in the nuts, but now he's like, oh wait, that's my
Can't do
kind of
that
sort
with
of
this
boss
guy.
over there, LeBron. Like I can't, don't want to do that, you know.
It's truly the most like you kind of have to be an NBA nerd to see it. But if
Yes.
you do see it, it's like the most blatant example of what all the old heads are complaining about with like players being buddy buddy now. Like
Yeah.
this is more blatant to me than when they're like hugging after games
Yeah.
or hanging out in the off season on their banana boats and whatnot, or like partnering with their tequila brands together. It's these moments where you're like, oh yeah, this is a different era. And I don't say that negatively. I love this era of
Yeah.
basketball. I don't think there's any problem with this. But if you're enough of an NBA nerd to see those things and to know those relationships and connections, to me, this is like the most blatant case that we ever see of these guys
Yeah.
being buddy buddy in a way that they weren't in different eras. And it's funny and it's fascinating. It's interesting.
Listeners now will not be able to unsee it. Like once they
Yes.
see, because there have been a lot of moments. This has been a hard fought series. This is at least going to be 6 games long. It's gone back and forth, and there have been these moments where like normally there would be a little extra showmanship. There would be, after a game, there would be a couple biting quotes and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, for the most part in this thing, it's been, I guess, clean is one word for it. Even though that has its own connotations that like it's better or whatever. But it's just its own thing. It's a super unique thing that I'm not sure we'll ever really see again, because what has to be built up in it is the years of LeBron seeing that team specifically, this core specifically, in the finals, and trying to impart on the Lakers like, hey guys, we cannot at any moment here put our heads, just like take a deep breath. We can't do anything like that, because you do that, you take one extra dumb shot. Don't you pay any attention to the 34 footers that I heave occasionally, but you take one extra dumb shot, you make one extra dumb pass, and all of a sudden it's a 8-0, 9-0, 10-0 run, just like that against this team specifically. And yeah, it's been really interesting to watch. And like we haven't quite seen, like last night was the first night, and I think it's not a coincidence that last night was the first night that we saw Draymond go full Draymond, in some spots. I think he even said something along the lines of like, what are you going to do? Tee me up, Yeah. And like the referees are like, no. And so like now that like the Warriors' backs are up against the wall and like the Lakers are in that same spot, they can't lose game 6 and go back to game 7. The series won't go very well if that's how this plays out. I think you are going to start seeing a few more of those very real moments, because there are, Steph's legacy is on the line. LeBron's legacy is on the line. Losing in the second round might end this dynasty that the Warriors have had. Does Steve Kerr get fired? All that stuff. And we'll talk about all of that like here in a bit. But yeah, what I think I'm really looking forward to is in game 6 and maybe game 7. And we've already seen it a little bit in game 5. That MTV Real World quote, right, where when they all stop being polite and start getting real, like I cannot. I enjoyed like a little taste of it last night, and I can't wait, because game 6 I think it's going to feel like a game 7, and then game 7 is going to be a game 7 if they get there. I can't wait for how this plays out. How do you think how do you think Steph specifically handles that? He's he's quiet, and most of his stuff like isn't generally aimed at people. Usually he'll like kind of turn away from the game and yell at the crowd or something like that. Draymond obviously is going to be Draymond. Clay like just like always has four fingers up in the air. But how do you how do you think Steph is going to handle this?
Yeah, that's a really fascinating question. And before I answer it, I'm just going to be annoying and go back to something you said really quickly, just
Yeah.
because it made me think of something. Series can be so bizarre in that, like, Lakers were up 3-1, which is like, every headline is going to say commanding lead, right? That's like the word that we always put on a 3-1 series
Yep.
is a commanding lead. And it feels like a huge thing to have to
Stranglehold
overcome.
and
Yeah.
yeah.
And yet everyone like the Lakers could have won yesterday. Sure. There's a chance they could have won on Wednesday, and there's a chance they can win game 7 if it goes to game 7. But everyone is accepting going into game 5 that the Warriors are going to win that game. And everyone is accepting that if the Warriors make it to game 7, they're going to win that game. So you have this quote unquote commanding lead of 3-1 that everyone is also basically saying game 6 is the only game that matters. It's like game 6
Right.
is game 7. Like, we already penciled in the Warriors to win game 5. We already penciled in the Warriors to win game 7 if they get there. The Lakers have a 3-1 lead.
But you only have one opportunity,
you only
really.
have one opportunity. And it's like,
Yeah.
and that's like flawed reasoning, obviously, because again, like, they were in it yesterday. And I'm not going to go into a game 7 at all feeling like the Warriors are for sure going to win that game if we make it there. But it's just a weird and funny kind of quirk where you can be so far in front and yet kind of weirdly it feels
In it.
like you're not.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's like
question.
it's
No,
like
sorry,
no I love that point because it's something every sports fan does. When your team wins a playoff game, you legitimately feel like they are never losing ever again. It is never happening. What we saw in that game is going to be replicated over and over and over and over and over. And yeah, like you're talking about, like Warriors fans, and it's funny. Even I did this yesterday where I went into it and I DM'd you and I was like, "There's no way that like the Lakers can win this thing, right?" And you weren't the only one. I messaged Pete. I messaged Matt. I messaged some other people who were really focused on betting stuff. Like, there's no way, right? And yet, like, knowing that and with that as my expectation going in, I was like, well, there's nothing I'm going to learn here that's really going to change the Lakers' approach here moving forward. One of the first things I said to Raj when we finally got around to the actual game last night is, yeah, I don't think Jared Vanderbilt can play. Like, and it's like, I knew going in there shouldn't be any grand scale macro takeaways from a game that I don't anticipate the Lakers are going to win. And yet still I'm like, yeah, but still, guys, did you watch him?
Yeah.
So yeah, but yeah, like how do you think that the real, like, how do you think Steph is going to handle being real? Like, are we going to see that, like, because he is one of the most fiery players that he's baby faced and all of that stuff, and he's like a smaller stature guy. So, although, like, we got to check him from steroids, man. Like, I've seen him like that guy is. You look at him now compared to where he was when he came in the league. He really swelled up. But yeah, like how do you think he's going to handle like this situation?
Yeah, I mean, I think what a lot of people who don't follow the Warriors closely miss is that Steph has that kind of psychopathic trait that Kobe and MJ had, where like he's a showman for sure, and like when he's home, he loves shimmying and dancing and like playing up the crowd. But make no mistake, Steph would so much rather win on the road and shut up fans than win at home and embrace the crowd. That's, and I think most people who have reached that level of success in sports are that way, where they're just kind of an asshole, and they would
like
much
winning
rather
isn't enough.
Yeah, like, winning isn't enough. You want to see that that privileged 8-year-old who in a $40,000 seat sideline cry because you just kicked his team's ass. Like, that's what he wants to do.
Same.
And so I think Anthony Irwin, lover of watching 8-year-olds cry.
Avery, just wait till you're 8. Every time you fall over, he's gonna laugh.
It's good parenting, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But I think we've kind of seen in the build up to this game, and we saw in the first round with Curry, right, where like he kind of played a little bit more of a point guard role against the Kings for a bit, and then of course Game 7 comes around, first player in NBA history to drop 50 in a Game 7, and I think he's been doing that a bit in this series. You know, he hasn't had that takeover offensive or that takeover scoring performance yet in this series, and it hasn't really been for lack of. It hasn't been that he can't do that. It's been that hasn't been what he's been trying to do. You know, he's been such a distributor, more so than we normally see from him. He's been getting everyone else going. And Steph kind of plays that long game, both within the 48 minutes of any one game and also within the 7 games of a series, where everything he's doing is kind of setting himself up and setting the team up for the next move. And so I think what we're really going to see from him in this game is closer to that Game 7 performance we saw in Sacramento, where he says, all right, I've spent 5 games getting everyone else in rhythm, even though they haven't really been getting in rhythm, but like he's been doing his part, setting teammates up, getting everyone to trust him, getting everyone to buy in on the system, getting as many shooters hot as possible. And I think he recognizes that, all right, now's the point where I just need to start cooking people. I just need to wave off the plays, call myself a lot of high pick and rolls, get switched onto different players, get switched onto Anthony Davis, pull him out of the paint. And I think we're going to see him put up 30 plus shots. I think we're going to see him, you know, the win or loss might come down to how many of those shots he makes. He might have another 50 piece in him. He might have 30 points on 35 shots night, in which case they ain't winning. But I think that's the mentality that we're going to see from him. I think he's probably incredibly excited about this opportunity. And I think we're going to see, you know, Steph has that kind of management leadership style where like he doesn't talk all that much, but he understands how people work and he understands what positions to put people in. And I think he understands, you know, this is the environment that Draymond Green thrives in. This is the environment that Klay Thompson thrives in, even though Klay has been bad this series. And I think his leadership style is going to be such that he is going to take over where he can, but he is also going to put those guys in a position to thrive, because Draymond Green back against the wall, playing in front of fans who hate him, there's nothing he would rather be doing in his life than that. Yeah. And Steph recognizes that. And I think he's a good enough leader to understand how to play into that and how to funnel that. So yeah, I expect a very focused Steph Curry. I think
absolutely.
He's excited as hell right now. I think I just can't wait for this game to happen.
Yeah, the thing that terrifies me the most about Game 6 and really honestly made me the most nervous going into the series in general is that like clearly LeBron is not 100%. Like we've seen him go, you know, on stretches where he will really focus on putting Klay in the basket and putting Steph in the basket and putting Wiggins in the basket however he can. But for the most part, he can't do that for, you know, much longer than 5-6 minute bursts at a time. And the thing that makes me really nervous in the series is that like Steph does have that gear. Like Steph has a gear in him that almost nobody else on the court has. AD has it defensively in the same way that Steph has it offensively, and we've seen some of that. But, you know, with the way that Steph plays offense, we've seen it. Like in the first half in Game 4, we did see that. We saw that approach from Steph, and we saw the Warriors look really effing good when he was playing that way. So well that like Stan Van Gundy was like actively yelling over at Steve Kerr, like, where'd the pick and rolls go? Like, I hate these guys.
I've ever seen Stan Van Gundy criticize a coach. Like Stan Van Gundy will bend over backwards to never criticize a coach.
Yeah.
And that was the first time where you could just like, he was trying so hard not to actually criticize, just like be confused politely.
It's so weird. They ran this many pick and rolls in the first half. I don't know where they went, Brian. Yeah, I don't know. I'm just like the backdrop to all of that criticism too is like these fuckers beat me in 2007 or whatever it was. Like, please do not let these people win. I hate this team. I hate this organization. They even made Dwight likable. How dare they? Like, yeah, the Steph aspect of this though is so terrifying because yeah, like that's the pitch that I think that either team has the most difficult dealing with, right? The Lakers' size can create problems if they really focus on getting to the rim and stuff like that, and really focus on crashing the boards and really forcing that size advantage on Golden State. But like Golden State has a speed counter that they can just say like, all right, well, you might score 2 out of every, 5 or so possessions, but those other 3 that you don't, you better hope that they were dead ball turnovers that allow you to get back and get set up. Because if you don't, we are running, and every single time, like I was doing the playback last night, and every single time Steph saw that AD wasn't in the paint, dart, just an absolute dart right to the rim, because he's like, this is the only time I can do this. Yeah. And yeah, like that's the counter. But the Lakers so far, I don't think have as, feasible a counter to those Steph pick and rolls as the Warriors have a counter to the Lakers size. And yeah, that's where Steph just breaks the math of the game. Like he just kind of molds the game in a way that really creates a whole bunch of advantages for his team. And yet he's the one who's down right now. He's the one who's down 3-2. And like, I'm curious, like, this is a really unique experience, I think, for Warriors fans, right? I don't believe they've ever been down 3-1. Right?
They have
or against OKC.
They beat OKC before then blowing their own 3-1 lead.
They did it before it was cool.
And I think they were down to the Raptors 3-1, but they obviously didn't overcome that one.
Yeah. But like I think in both of the series that you're talking about, Raptors is a little different because you had so many injuries that like it just was what it was. But I felt like against OKC, you still felt pretty confident in being the better team there, I thought. Yeah. Even when they had to overcome some stuff against Houston, you still felt like they were the better team, and eventually Chris Paul was going to do Chris Paul stuff. And in this one though, like I do think like Kerr has started 3 different starting lineups in 5 games. This experience of feeling like an underdog, a legitimate underdog for stretches here. How has that experience been? And like, what have your comment sections been like?
Man, the comment sections are trash, man. I'll be honest. Like, I try to avoid talking about fans of any fan base on Twitter and whatnot, but in the last few days, I've broken that rule to just call out Warriors fans because they're just being completely ridiculous. Yeah. I mean, I'm just stunned given what this organization has done in the last 8 years and how many times they've been behind the 8 ball and found a way to win. Yeah. I'm just shocked at how much pessimism is in the fan base that's just like, nah, there's nothing you can do at this point. This is a horrible team. They need to fire their coach. They need to start over. They need to get back James Wiseman.
It's just no way. I refuse to believe that happened. I refuse it. Fans, not even James Wiseman's mom thinks that. Like,
no, not even James Wiseman thinks that, man. But it's just I think it's the sign of like a dynasty coming to a close, which like we don't know when that's going to happen. It might happen tomorrow. It might happen in like 3 or 4 years. But there's obviously like more of the dynasty in the rear view than in front of the team right now, and people cope with that different ways. I had a commenter on last year who I'm pretty sure I've told you this story before, but like I had a commenter who would repeatedly comment last year that he was rooting for the Warriors to lose in the first round because he thought that would be the wake up call that the front office and coaching staff needed.
The wake up call.
Couldn't win a championship with this team, and then they go out and win a championship. Like, what are we doing here?
Did that commenter ever come back and be like, man, I was, I regret to tell the internet that I was wrong?
Nope. he returned and just completely ignored that and went right back into why they need to lose this year instead. Interesting fan base, very interesting fan base. But
Yeah.
it is weird seeing them be kind of underdogish, but it's also like it's a weird situation because like on the one hand they are the underdogs right now in the series, and on the other hand I think a lot of people feel like they shouldn't be. Like
Yeah.
it feels more like, all respect to the Lakers who deserve to be up 3-2. This is to take nothing away from them. I think most Warriors fans and most people in the Warriors organization feel that the team that has beat them this series is themselves.
Hmm.
And that's just the reality of a close series, right? Like they've lost two very close games. Anytime
Well,
you
and
lose two
Lakers
close games,
flopping, right?
oh yeah, it's the Lakers flopping is the main. It would have been a sweep if it weren't for the Lakers flopping. If the refs understood how to see a flop, the
Yeah.
Warriors would have already won the championship by now.
Yeah.
So that's
These
just
refs have never seen a
oversight.
flop before in their lives.
Never.
And it's just like, man, what is this thing? Why do they keep falling?
Fully confused. They must be getting fouled clearly.
Yeah.
But it's like, I mean, that's the case with every team, right? Like when you lose a close game, you blame yourself more than you credit the other team. And I think that's doubly true for the Warriors right now because they have like the two close games they lost. Those were games they really should have won. Like you should not let Lonnie Walker score 15 points in the fourth quarter. You should not have the type of horrible execution down the stretch that they had in game one. And even if you go back beyond that, I think the main reason they lost game one is because they chose not to show up for a closeout game at home in game 6 against the Kings. And as a result, they had to go play a game 7, and they were operating with so much less rest than the Lakers were for game one. If the Warriors do what they should have done and win game 6 against the Kings, they win game 1 against the Lakers. I feel pretty comfortable saying that. And that's not an excuse because it's the Warriors' damn fault.
It's still their fault.
Game 6, like, and it's the Lakers' credit that they went out and just kicked Memphis's ass in game 6 and not only got those extra rest days, but got some second half rest for their stars too, because the game was so uncompetitive. Like that's an area where the Lakers succeeded and the Warriors failed. And it's a big part of why the series is 3-2 in the Lakers' favor instead of 3-2 in the Warriors' favor. But because of those things, I think when you just like watch the ability of the Warriors and the execution, I think you can make the case if you have Warriors colored glasses that they should be the better team in this series. They haven't been, but I think you can make the case that they should be. So it's a weird position where they're the underdog. They haven't played as well. They're obviously down in the series, but you also kind of feel like you don't need a miracle. You don't need something special that you can't foresee happening to happen. You just need to do the things that you should have been doing all season. And that's been the frustration with the Warriors the entire season, because that was their regular season. That was their first round against the Kings. Been the entire season is you should be better than you are. And why are you not? And so it's a weird situation where they're like the underdog, but they're only the underdog because they've been disappointing and fell off from being the favorite to the underdog solely by their own disappointment. So it's like,
it's funny. You look at the odds here, and right now Vegas has the Lakers as negative 210 to win the series, right? So you get half your money basically. But if the Lakers win out on tomorrow or tonight, by the time you guys are listening to this, the Warriors are listed as only plus 180. You look at the other series where I think you can probably say the same thing about the Celtics, right? Where the Celtics, I think, are pretty clearly, I think, the better team, in terms of just talent. And they're only plus 150 to come back in there. So you're not getting much. Like the team that has to go out and win 2 straight playoff games, again, you're not getting much if they actually go out and do that, if you bet on them. And I think in both of those cases, you look at the other series that's actually still listed, because the Nuggets Suns one is off the boards for some reason here. The Knicks are plus 340, and that's like a normal price for a team that is down, heading into a game 6 on the road. Yeah. That's like the normal price.
You should win 25% of the time. Like if it's a coin flip, you should win 25% of the time. So that's about where the odds should be.
Right. And yeah, like I do think, because look, I came into the series and have at various points over the course of this series thought like, oh yeah, look, infamously said that like if Lonnie Walker is a big adjustment, this is a 5 game series. Like the Warriors are just that overwhelming, especially mathematically, that like it's impossible to ignore the math. I cannot not think of the math, and yeah, like the Lakers. I think the reason they're in the spot that they're in is because they have created their own mathematical advantages, right? Getting to the free throw line as often as they have in the games that they won, limiting the offensive rebounds and the turnovers, and especially the live ball turnovers that really ignite the Warriors' playing style. So it's still really closely matched here. It's still like I would probably say that I think the Lakers are going to win Game 6. Because like there's just a lot, and like the thing that is like still very cognitively in the back of my mind is at some point like the stuff that you're talking about, that's a cultures thing, right? Like that there are enough adults in the room, you would think, to be able to imprint on everybody the importance of a situation, winning in a Game 6 so you don't have to play an extra Game 7 and lose the rest advantage, or create a rest disadvantage going into the next series. And I know that this word is a very weighted word and there's a lot behind it, but you look at some of the quotes and the headlines coming out from Warriors camp about Kuminga and about Poole, and again, for lack of a better term, but it just, there's this sense of entitlement because that's all they've ever experienced. They have no other professional NBA experience than having Steph and Draymond and Clay there to win you a championship no matter what you do. And now they're like, well, no, it's my turn now. And like, I really think what you're talking about, that tension that exists between the guys who know what it takes to win at the level that they want to win at, and the guys that they're like dragging to be able to do that. And an organization, by the way, that has convinced itself that that future is worth continuing to focus on, even despite having a real chance at continuing the dynasty immediately. Like that, like all of that just comes together and it creates the spot that the Warriors are in, where you can make a very real case that if everybody has their heads on straight, the Warriors are not just like the most talented team left in the field, but like maybe fairly easily, because every other team is so flawed in one way or another. But having to overcome all of the nonsense and do so like, at this stage of a season where the margins are so thin, that's the difference between being up 3-2 or being done 4-1 and actually being down 3-2 with elimination staring you at the face. It's all of it is really fascinating.
Yeah, it's very fascinating. This is a team that this year, more than in any other year, and maybe more than I've ever seen in the NBA, is playing with their food. And they're just playing with their food, and it reminds me of the if there are any MMA fans listening to this, there's that famous video. Even if you're not an MMA fan, if you're just a sports fan, you know this video of Anderson Silva just playing with his food against Chris Weidman and just arms down, just dancing around, showing him that you can't hit me, you can't hit me. And then boom, he gets knocked out cold. And
man, I was hoping not to talk about concussions today, but here we
are.
My
bad. Fine. My bad. That was very tone deaf. Very tone deaf. Oh God. That was my bad, guys. Very, very, very poor move on my behalf.
Yeah.
But the Warriors are like, that hasn't happened to them yet, but it's come close. And they've been playing with their food. And, it's both the reason I think for optimism and pessimism, if you're a Warriors fan in this series, is that like what we saw against the Kings that is why you should think this team can win a championship. And that is why you should think that this team might get destroyed in Game 6 against the Lakers. Is they were so unserious against the Kings, drop 2 road games, drop Game 6 in a blowout when they have a chance to win. And then what do they do in Game 7 when they actually need to win a game? They just came out and just murked them. And that's they're playing like they know they can do that. They played the first 4 games of the series like they knew that when the lights are on and it's time to shine, that they'll find a way to get it done. And you can't at some level, you can keep doing that. They could do that against the Kings. I don't know that they can do that against the Lakers. We're going to find out. And if they do it against the Lakers, they're going to have to figure out how to stop doing it, because you're not going to do it 4 series straight. It's just not going to happen. And so I think, it's such an interesting situation, because I think the Warriors are incredibly confident that they're going to win this series. I really think they are. And I don't think that's the brash kind of confidence that led Monte Ellis to once say that he was the best player in the world, not named Kobe Bryant. I think it's the actual confidence that they genuinely, in their heart of heart, think that they're going to win, because they think that they're the better team, and they think they just waited until they had to win. But especially against a team with LeBron James and Anthony Davis, there's only so much you can play with their food. And I think, they're towing the line, and we're going to see which side they fall on.
Let's say this plays out where the Lakers win tonight by the time everybody is listening to this, and the series is over. If we want to go so far as to say dynasty overs, whatever. This season has felt very much like The Last Dance, right? It starts with a Draymond punch to Jordan Poole, and now you're seeing Poole not be able to offer up the punch off of the bench that he normally does. This series, how far does it go in kind of deciding the next steps that the Warriors take?
That's hard. It's a fascinating question, and I don't know what the answer is. I think it goes a pretty far away. I think, first off,
usually fascinating questions, like it's really hard to find the answer.
Yeah, true.
Yeah,
good point. Brady learns how language works.
That's a really tough question. Here's how you answer it.
Brilliant. There are a lot of different factors here. And I think the first is that, it's been well documented that the Warriors are paying an obscene amount of money in taxes. And Joe Lacob has said numerous times that there's a $400 million figure that he won't go over. And that number, that they haven't hit that figure because Jordan Poole's extension hasn't kicked in yet. But if they keep those 5 high-paid players next year, they will blow past that number. And he's kind of hedged on that. Lacob was kind of hedged on that a little bit. Like, he said pretty clearly right after the championship last year, no, we're not going to spend more than $400 million. But this year he's kind of hedged back to the if we're winning championships, we'll consider anything, but we're not going to pay that kind of money to not win championships. And so I think, a second round exit, even if they lose in overtime of Game 7 to the Lakers and the Lakers go on to win the championship, I think Joe Lacob is competitive enough and egotistical enough that it's just not good enough. And that the answer for him is not to continue spending the money hoping that it gets better. It's to say either we need to change things, or we need to at least keep doing this, but at a more sustainable price point. So I would be pretty surprised if they lose this series and still have all 5 of those guys under contract next season. That just doesn't seem feasible to me. But I think a lot really comes down to what happens with Bob Myers. There have been so many rumors swirling around with Bob Myers. His contract is going to expire. They have had conversations, but they have not reached a new deal. And there are a lot of different factors at play there. There's, Lacob is kind of notorious for not being willing to spend money except for on the roster. They lost, they infamously lost Chelsea Lane, their head athletic trainer, to the Hawks because she essentially asked for a pay raise and they were like, nah, we'll find someone else. That's happened with other lower level positions. Whether that would happen with a GM or not kind of remains to be seen. Joe Lacob has kind of had some pretty pointed comments about how Bob Myers is a very well-paid GM. And that kind of hints to a little bit of tension if what Bob Myers is saying is he deserves more money and Joe Lacob is telling the public that he's getting enough money. That's a little bit pointed. There's obviously been rumors that Myers might want a new challenge, might want to go, try to rebuild a team, might want to go back to being an agent, might want just a break from the NBA grind. And I think that's really, the biggest question here is what happens with Bob Myers, because I don't think I don't think that Bob Myers would be willing to stay on this team and hit the reset button. The whole two timelines nonsense is exactly that. It's nonsense. It's not going to happen. I'm sorry. It's ludicrous. And Joe Lacob might think that it can't happen. And if he decides, or Bob Myers decides, that partnership is done, then we might see that. Then we might see a team that is asking Draymond Green to opt out, looking to trade Klay Thompson, or just letting Klay and Steph kind of ride into the sunset while they build around Wiggins and Poole and Kuminga, maybe trade some players and try to get some young players. But if Bob Myers is there, I think he understands that, the Warriors might be on the tail end of their dynasty. They might not be the juggernaut they once were, but a core of Steph Curry and Draymond Green and Klay Thompson and Kevon Looney and Andrew Wiggins is still a way better chance at winning a championship than starting
Jonathan
over.
Kuminga
And Jonathan
Jordan
Kuminga
Poole.
And Jordan Poole. Or even like getting, even if
I don't think that's a hot take.
I don't think it is, but you would be surprised at how many Warriors fans just kind of think that like this is an easy thing to build a winner. And it's not. And like maybe it's easy to build like a Raptors team that can perennially be like the 6th or 7th seed, and you hope that maybe Kawhi falls into your lap someday and you can win one championship. But like Steph Curry is still one of the like 5 best building blocks for winning a championship. And even if he has like a shorter expiration date than some players, you have a championship window open regardless of what happens in the series. It's not nearly as open as it was in 2015 or 2016, but you're still one of the teams with the most easily accessible path to a championship. And Bob Myers, I feel confident, understands that and knows that and will prioritize that. But if he's not there,
then
I don't know.
Yeah, I mentioned the entitlement that I noticed from like Kuminga and Poole, but you could extend that exact same word in probably tenfold towards Lacob in his approach of doing this. Like he showed up, Steph was already there, the dynasty was ready to be built, and this is all he's known.
Yeah.
And at some point, there is kind of that rude awakening of like, oh, damn, I really shouldn't have cared about 2 timelines while I had that guy, And that was the thing that, back when, I have friends who cover the Cavs. We have friends who cover the Cavs. And when LeBron left the second time, I asked them, I was like, hey, do you think that organization has like learned how to exist in the NBA without having LeBron there to cover up so many things? And they said like, maybe. There are some things that like might indicate maybe one way or the other, but for the most part, probably not. Because how if all you've known, like for who's the guy who's in New Orleans now, David Griffin. For David Griffin, while he was there that whole time, all he knew was having LeBron. That's it. Like that was his professional experience. And he goes to New Orleans and like, he's done pretty well for himself. But like trades away Anthony Davis and, fortunately gets Zion Williamson to land in his lap. But you've seen his struggles as he's trying to figure out how to operate in a LeBron-less world. And I think this thing with Steph and the next steps that the Warriors take here moving forward, I think are really going to be painted by whether or not they have that self-awareness to understand how rare Steph is.
Yeah.
The Lakers are really fortunate because you go from Magic to Kobe, and then LeBron like one day just decides like, I want to be a Laker. Space Jam 2, can't wait. And like the Lakers don't necessarily have to have that like self-awareness. But even over the course of the season, while they were like waiting to trade Russell Westbrook, I was like, hey guys, you realize the opportunity you're potentially squandering here too. So all of like, I think it's really easy to have organizational entitlement, Yeah. And I think that is the biggest thing that the Warriors really have to overcome. If they lose this series, if that slice of crow that they'll have to eat kind of organizationally is really going to be fascinating to see how they deal with that.
Yeah, I fully agree. And, I've said this a lot on podcasts and articles, on tweets. on tweets, in tweets.
Yeah.
Language today, man. I'm really learning a lot of things. This is
You're a
going back to
writer?
school. But I brought this
Well,
up a
you're a
lot.
writer. You're not a speaker. Like
I'm not.
you have the delete button in writing.
I have
You're
the
good.
delete button, and I have Grammarly, and I have a mother who will happily read anything I want, and I have a great editor. Shout out Harrison Fagan.
Yeah.
I know
But
you hate him, but I like.
I mean, he fired me, so.
I think that's a good place to wrap this up, right?
Yeah, that's it. All right, we'll talk to you guys later.
But Joe Lacob has he's publicly stated so many times that he wants to emulate the Spurs model of sustained success over 20 years. And I bring this up a lot that
have you watched their last 5?
Yes. Have you watched the last 5 years? And the Spurs had sustained success for 2 primary reasons. With all due respect to Manu and Pop, who are amazing, and Tony Parker, they had sustained success because they drafted one of the 10 greatest players in NBA history who was very good for almost 20 years. Mm-hmm. And as he was starting to tail off, they somehow drafted Kawhi Leonard, who, when he is healthy, is probably one of the 15 most talented players in NBA history. And that is why they sustained that success. And now they don't have those guys. And even with their lottery picks, they've built a crap team that is going to be crap for a very, very long time, it looks like.
Yeah.
And the point there that I think Joe Lacob doesn't necessarily realize, and a lot of Warriors, a lot of people in the organization, a lot of fans, I think, don't necessarily realize, is that you can't just build a second timeline with young players. You need a seminal superstar. And that's not something that you can just go out and draft or develop. That's not something that you can say, hey, Bob Myers, you're a great GM. Hey, Steve Kerr, you're a great coach. Let's go draft the next Kawhi Leonard. No, you need to get really, 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 really lucky. Yeah. And that's the only way to have a 2 timeline, is to get really, really, really lucky. And twice. And they got really, 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 really lucky with Steph Curry. Thank you, David Kahn. You are a Bay Area legend for drafting Ricky Rubio and Johnny Flynn.
Yeah.
The Warriors got really lucky once. And, sure, you could talk about 2 timelines if James Wiseman or Jonathan Kuminga or Jordan Poole looked like Kawhi Leonard. And all respect to them, they do not. And that's not surprising. That's not a failure by anyone that you didn't draft the next Kawhi Leonard. That's just the cold, hard reality. And, the Spurs get love for being this cool, selfless team that plays team ball and whatnot. The Detroit Pistons, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm going off the top of my head here. The Detroit Pistons in the aughts are the only team in NBA history that has won a championship without having a top 5 or 10 player.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's just, and I think that's doubly true in this era.
And even there, when he was right, Rasheed Wallace was one of the most talented players of that era.
He was one of the most talented players, and they had 5 guys who were perennial all-stars, essentially.
Yeah.
It was a very special blend that led to them being able to do that.
Well, and I'm trying to think of because they had Ben Wallace, who's a Hall of Famer.
Yep.
Chauncey's close.
Close.
Rip and Tayshaun was I
called him Torian.
Tayshaun was
all-stars.
Tayshaun was a mold ahead of his time, right? When 3-and-D wings weren't really thought of as that important.
Yeah,
he had
3-and-D
that
wing was super long and could get out in transition. He would have been an all-star every year in this era.
And then you had Rasheed, who would have been a Hall of Famer if he wasn't such a crazy person.
Yeah, who on his best day was one of the best players in the NBA.
Yeah.
So, I think people forget that it's that's how you win a championship. All respect to the role players, all respect to the coaches. They need to do their job to win a championship. There's a reason that only one team can win, and there are top 5, top 10 players every year who lose, and there are top 5 and top 10 players who never win a championship. But there just aren't teams that win a championship without that top 5 or top 10 player. You need Steph, you need LeBron, you need Giannis. And so any talk for, goes back to the word you used, entitlement. Any talk that you can just build another championship winner with and it doesn't involve having
and there's no path to
there's
that next star.
There's none. James Wiseman was your hope at that path. You hope that when you have the number 2 pick that you can get that, but and I didn't like the pick, but that's not even a failure on their behalf. Like I don't think they handled that situation
Like
well.
in the Giannis way, or
Like, that was quick. That was good. That was good. Yeah. All right. So maybe a little bit of a failure. But like, that's another area of entitlement where like fans are like, you have the number 2 pick, you should get a superstar.
Yeah.
That's not how it works. Like, you go back and you look at the history of the number 2
Look at the
pick.
Lakers. They drafted Lonzo. They drafted Ingram. Like,
both
those guys are good players, but neither of those guys are like cornerstones to a championship organization right now.
Yeah. Like, if you go back a lot of years, like Kevin Durant might be the only number 2 pick that's really like a super duper star right now. And that's just the reality of drafting. Even when you have a high pick, it's a crapshoot at some level. The odds are stacked against you. And even with hindsight, maybe the Warriors should have drafted Tyrese Halliburton or LaMelo Ball instead of James Wiseman. You're not winning a championship with Tyrese Halliburton or LaMelo Ball as your best player. Like, I love those guys, and maybe they'll prove me wrong. Maybe they'll like take that next jump. But like, the Warriors would be in a way better position if they had Tyrese Halliburton on their roster right now. You're still not in a 2 timeline position where you're able to just smoothly glide right into your next championship with Tyrese Halliburton as your best player. I love the guy, but like, let's be for real. He's not Steph Curry.
Yeah.
And you don't have another Steph Curry. And I think I'm sorry, I'm just really on a rant here, but like,
well, you could have flipped Halliburton for Sabonis, and that worked out really well in the playoffs. Like that went really well.
There we go. There it is. Get that championship grit of Domantas Sabonis.
82, like vaunted 82 game player.
It's still wild to me that the Kings have had as much success as they've had after that trade. Like that was one of the catalysts to finally making the playoffs. Is you trade like the best player you've drafted in like God knows how long.
Yeah. Well, like it's the weird dichotomy between the 82 game regular season and the 16 game postseason, right? He has enough skill that is going to be really difficult to deal with on a nightly basis over the course of, like, on a random Thursday night. He's a tough player to go up against. But when you have an entire like 2-week series to game plan against him, that's where you're going to see some of those issues. And by the way, you might be able to say the same thing about Halliburton. Like, you might, like, he's not that overwhelming LeBron, Steph, Giannis player that you can't game plan against and take them out. You game plan against to try to minimize them. And like this notion, I've always just kind of laughed. And frankly, like, as somebody whose favorite team has to compete in a division against the Warriors, I've just been sitting here this whole time like, yes, 2-time. You got to keep an eye towards the future, Bob or Joe. You really got to focus on not maximizing Steph, because we've seen it's fucking terrifying when they maximize Steph. Like that KD Steph team is, you can make a real case it's the greatest team that has ever been assembled in NBA history and maybe basketball history. Like that team might have beaten the dream team. Like that team was insane.
Man.
I just that's why this series and the outcome of this series is so fascinating. And I know this is a Lakers pod, but I do think there are real lessons to learn here for any team. Like anybody listening to the show is like, it is not when you have a Steph, or like in the Lakers case, as they've had a LeBron, let alone a LeBron and an Anthony Davis, like this notion when the Lakers were talking, well, we can't trade the 2029 pick, or they can't trade both the 27 and 29 pick. I'm like, who gives a shit about 2029? We've seen what a single trade or 2 trades basically have done for the Lakers' chances this year, and it's because LeBron and AD are really effing good.
Yeah.
And like with the Warriors case here, like they're down 3-2 in this series, but had they flipped Wiseman earlier when his stock was higher and brought in somebody who could more immediately help, this would not be a series. Yeah. This would not, everybody would be playing for second right now.
Yeah.
And like the sports fan in me is really kind of bummed, because I want to see somebody like Steph's career maximized, but like the competitor in me is like Way to go, Joe.
Yeah.
Thanks, bud.
Yeah. I mean, nail on the head there. Like if the NBA just like started over today and teams were drafting from everyone and you could only give out 1 year contracts, you're just drafting to build a championship team this year. Steph Curry's a top 5 pick. Like
Yeah.
zero question, maybe a top 3 pick. Like
You
if you're
could make
trying
the
to build,
argument like Steph and LeBron are the top 2 picks.
yeah,
Because maybe Giannis, is if all you're focused on is 1 year,
1
you
year.
just need 1 year from LeBron. He's like,
Yeah,
you're
I
looking at
think-
2 of those guys. And at one point this year, both the Lakers and the Warriors were looking towards their future when they had top
those
2
guys.
or 3 picks.
Yeah, which is just insane. The goal is to win a championship. You have the most important piece of that.
Yeah.
There's no excuse to do anything except go all in on that. This isn't baseball. You don't have a minor league system. You can't like be
Well, the Lakers do. It's the
grooming-
Grizzlies, but yeah.
True. There's that Lakers exception. This is extra privilege. They get the flop calls. They get the minor league team.
It's like the Grizzlies and the Magic. Like Paolo Banchero, you are a Laker. It's just a matter of time.
We just don't know when it's going to happen, but it's going to happen.
Yeah. You see, that's where you got to make like the Warriors exceptionalism. You're looking at Shea, and it's like, yeah, eventually Shea's just going to be a Warrior.
See, this is an interesting, like this is a topic for a different day, but like that's a really interesting point to me because like the Warriors, I think the 2 timelines thing is BS. They need to be focused on the current timeline, but they like if they're going to focus on the future, it should be less on how are you building your second timeline with the players that are on your roster, and it should be more on how do you become a team like the Lakers where you are the destination regardless of how you're doing. And they're never going to be able to be the Lakers on that front because LA is LA. Like that's the biggest possible, LA and New York or LA and New York. And like, there's nothing any team can do to compete with that. But the Bay Area is a popular place. You have a shiny new arena. You have owners that spend a lot of money. You have probably the best practice facilities in the NBA. Like they need to be doing things that, because right now they're appealing to players because you could come and play with Steph and you could potentially win a championship. But they need to be setting the table so that, in 2 or 3 years when Steph is either retired or just not that seminal superstar anymore, what are you doing to be that organization where a Shai Gilgeous-Alexander says, hell yeah, I'm like, sorry, OKC, why would I stay here when I could play for the Warriors? And I don't think that they're that organization. I don't think the Warriors are a bright and shiny organization. I think Steph Curry is a bright and shiny organization. And
I
even figure that out.
I take that a step further. And this was my concern with the way that the Lakers were handling the season earlier, where like players around the league are watching them potentially waste another season of LeBron, another season of AD. And stars are like, well, I'm not going to go somewhere where I'm not going to be maximized.
True.
And so like other stars around the league, I would imagine, are looking at Steph have to drag Jordan Poole and Jonathan Kuminga and what's Wiseman's James Wiseman. Like maybe stay away from J names, Joe. that
found the problem.
But like I would imagine there are conversations around the league where like people are looking at everything Steph has had to do to, keep that organization afloat during this 2 timeline weird process that they've taken upon themselves. And yeah, like I not only would I say they haven't built that organization that players and stars are really going to, force their way to, but depending on how this goes and depending on how this offseason goes, can make a real argument that they've done the opposite of that. And they've actually hurt their chances of that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think like it's been telling, like you look at Damian Lillard, for instance, the amount of positive things he has said about Draymond Green on Twitter this season is just like outrageous. Like he's just like, I mean, and obviously a huge part of that is recruiting, but it doesn't matter. Like the point is the same. Like Draymond Green, for all his antics and all he angers people and even angers players,
they want that guy on their team.
They want that guy on their team. They believe that guy's a winner. LeBron wants him on his team. Dame wants him on his team. And if you do something like trade Draymond, or he opts out and you don't make him a competitive offer,
Yeah, or you tell him to opt
or you
out.
tell him to opt out, yeah.
Yeah.
And then you keep building around Jordan Poole, who I think everyone has taken note of Jordan Poole's body language in these last
Yeah.
two series. Like when you're looking at a Giannis or a Doncic potentially getting frustrated with their franchises not winning, you're right. Like those guys aren't going to look at the Warriors forcing Draymond Green out and building around Jordan Poole next to Steph Curry and say, yeah, this is where I need to go to maximize my chances to be a superstar who is winning championships year in and year out. So there's a lot at stake there, even though despite what I said about the two timelines things, like you do need to be looking down the road.
Eventually, at some point,
at some point you need to, and like those are
maybe
the things
just
you can be looking.
Maybe not while you have Steph. Like
but like you can look down the road while you have Steph in a way that doesn't hurt Steph, right? Like you can look at how you're treating Steph. You can look at how you're treating the organization and other players to make yourself more likable. That I think is how you prioritize the second timeline, not getting rid of your players that are helping you win championships now to build around players that might never be good.
Yeah. The real key, I think, for them, even having had this conversation, is Kirk Lacob. Like, that he's the key to the future. He's your second timeline. He's the superstar who's going to step in and figure everything out.
Those Nepo babies, they always do it, man. It works.
It's nepotism has never failed in the past.
It's never failed, especially in the NBA.
Yeah,
it's like it's shooting 100%.
Yeah, I mean, that said, like, either Avery or Miles are going to be able to take over this podcasting empire one day. But
I look forward to podcasting with them in 30 years.
Yeah, your kids and my kids just one day, just like talking about the two timelines.
We'll just be sitting right out of camera, just 6 beers, just laughing,
like holding up SNL writing boards, yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Talk about when Draymond punched someone in the nuts.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Do you remember that?
Which time?
You were 2.
Yeah. Well, this has been an absolute blast, man. It always is. Again, Golden State of Mind is where you can find Brady's work. Also at SB Nation in general. Miss working with you, bud. Glad to hear that you're doing well, and I hope that you really hate the way that Game 6 plays out.
Likewise, man. Likewise to all of that.
Talk to you soon.
Take care, buddy.